What's happening? Thanks for joining me as always on this Tuesday morning. It is very much appreciated. Yesterday, Jerod Mayo spoke to the media about the Patriots offseason. Today, it was Robert Kraft's turn. What did the owner have to say? The State of the Patriots address this morning down in Orlando. I do want to tell you before we get into the conversation and the content, I don't have all the full quotes. I have no producer to pull the clips, so I got what I could get from Twitter this morning and some other resources. But I might have some more in-depth quotes tomorrow if we miss anything today. But I grabbed all of this stuff from Twitter, from the beat reporters down there in Orlando, and watched a couple of videos as well. The timing of this made it difficult to pull everything together before we got started today on this March 26th morning. Okay, so let's start with the front office. Robert Kraft spoke about the front office today with the media. Here's what he had to say about Elliott Wolf. Quote, "The major decisions in my life, I've gone with my instincts. I think Elliott has good training, good pedigree. We have a good group of young people." I'm glad that Robert Kraft went beyond his instinct. You know, he pushed this idea during the Jerod Mayo introductory press conference that he trusts his instincts. And when he goes with his instincts, they usually lead him the right way. Now, that hasn't always been the case in his life, as we know. But I'm glad he went beyond instincts because I need something more tangible than it felt good in my belly. Like, give me something more than that. Instincts are fine, but what was it that drove you to the decision of promoting Elliott Wolf during this very critical offseason when you had tens of millions of dollars at your fingertips for free agency and you have a top 3 pick coming up in about a month from now? So give me something more tangible. So I'm glad that Kraft mentioned pedigree and training, and he gave us more than just instinct. Secondly, the question that I need to be asked, and I don't know if this was asked to Kraft today, but the question that needs to be asked is the process that led to Kraft making the decision to promote Elliott Wolf without conducting outside interviews. He can tell us he did this by instinct. He can talk about the pedigree. He could talk about the training of Elliott Wolf. But what kind of conversations happened before that decision was made? Were there in-depth conversations? Were people from the outside brought in as consultants to help guide Kraft to make this decision? What kind of conversations happened? How many of those conversations went down before the decision was made to make Wolf the guy for this offseason? I need to know that information. I'd also comment that, pedigree and training is great, but of course, it doesn't always equal success. You can have the best training, you can have the greatest pedigree in the world, but it doesn't mean that you are going to succeed at the job. What we have to decide after this offseason and maybe next offseason is whether or not Wolf is capable of doing the job when the bullets are flying. How does Wolf react in real time? When somebody's calling him, he picks up the phone. What's he say? How's he say it? How do those conversations continue to develop throughout the process, whether it's free agency or the draft? Is he quick thinking on his feet? As we know, you look at the Red Sox, Chaim Bloom was always hesitant to pull the trigger on trades. So in theory is one thing. I can sit there and be an armchair GM and tell you what I would do. But when I'm sitting in the office and I'm taking phone calls, I'm talking to people, I'm doing the homework, all of those things, and the events are happening in real time, how am I reacting to it? So pedigree and training is great. Resume is great. Can he actually put things in motion when he has to? That's what we are waiting to see. How does he execute the plan? Putting it on paper is one thing. The execution is an entirely different situation. All right, I'll have much more thoughts on Robert Kraft in a minute, but first I'll take a second to ask you to give us that thumbs up. Of course, all the likes mean the world to us. We are no longer streaming to Twitter. We're not streaming to Facebook. We are only going live on YouTube. So every single like that you guys and gals can give us means an awful lot to this program and its success. So don't forget to give us that like. Don't forget to subscribe as well. We are about 250 subscriptions away from our goal of 3,000 by April 8th. We got just over a week or two here, so we got to get moving to hit that goal. 3,000 subscribers by April 8th. Don't forget to subscribe when you swing by if you like what we do. And Spotify, Apple Pods, if you listen on one of those devices, one of those applications, you can head over to YouTube and do us a favor by liking the video and also subscribing to the channel. Even if you listen on Spotify and Apple Pods, that will help us out. And of course, you can always check out the exclusive content on the Patreon page, patreon.com/Nick Cattle, Cattles. Here's more Kraft. Kraft on the front office's performance. Quote, excited by what I've seen so far when it comes to how Wolf and Jerod Mayo have gone about the rebuild. Look, and I know that everybody that is pushing the spending agenda and is upset and they don't believe that Robert Kraft and this team has spent money this offseason. I've talked about how I disagree with that and why I disagree with it, but that's a conversation we've already had. I know people have the spending jokes in the chamber when Robert Kraft says he's excited by what he has seen so far. Of course he's excited because they're not spending a ton of money. Robert Kraft loves not spending money. Yada, yada, yada. Kraft has long stood by the draft and the impact that it should have on your football team. He is a believer in drafting and developing. He mentioned this over the past couple of years. Going back 2 years ago, he was very frustrated looking at the recent track record of Belichick and the draft. And he said as much. We need to draft better. We need to develop better. Here was Kraft on Elliott Wolf's fate. Quote, we'll evaluate after the draft and see how that's gone and decide where we go from there. Now, I think Elliott Wolf and company stay. They have been given the keys to run this rebuild. It is not a one off-season rebuild, not even close. You have to wait at least 2 off seasons to evaluate what kind of job that they have done. They allowed Wolf to bring in Alonzo Highsmith. I don't think Highsmith takes a top job in the front office for 5 months. I don't believe he leaves his alma mater to do that. So I think that Wolf and Highsmith and these guys are going to stay beyond this offseason. I think when the draft is over, we will find out that officially Wolf is going to be the guy moving forward. That's what I think. But as far as what Robert Kraft said today, we'll evaluate after the draft and see how that's gone and decide where we go from there. That comment makes 0 sense. It makes 0 sense. Let's think about this for a minute. How in the world are you going to evaluate a draft a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later? We don't know what's going to happen with these guys. How many times do you walk out of a draft saying to yourself, that was a fantastic draft, that was a great job, and then 2 years later, oh my God, what the hell happened? How many times do we look at a team, they draft a certain individual in a round, and we say, well, what were they thinking? Why would you draft that guy in that spot? 2 years later, that team, they look brilliant. So how in real time can you evaluate a draft when the draft at its very essence, at its very core, is all about developing those guys that you select and reaping those rewards 2 or 3 years down the road? Now, some of these guys that are drafted, of course, you want them to make an instant impact. But to sit there and say, if you're Robert Kraft, to tell the media that you are going to evaluate after this draft and see how things have gone and decide where to go with this front office from there, that makes 0 sense. It makes as much sense as evaluating and judging an offseason in early March, like some people were doing, in the middle of March, like some people have been doing. How do you have the full picture? You don't. How can you possibly evaluate a draft and how effective your front office was when you don't know what those guys are going to do in the next year or two in their NFL careers? It doesn't add up to me. I'd also ask this question. if you are going to evaluate the draft right after said draft, who is helping Robert Kraft evaluate the draft and the execution and how Wolf and the front office did? Robert Kraft doesn't want to get involved with football decisions. He's told us that. So the guy who doesn't want to get involved in football decisions, how are you going to evaluate the draft before you see these guys on the field doing the job? It doesn't make any sense. Are you picking up the phone and talking to people outside of the building and they're telling you? Do you have consultants telling you how the draft was run and what they think? What if those people are wrong? You got to let this thing play out. The day you allowed Elliott Wolf to run this front office for this offseason is the day you decided you got to let this play out. You got to give this front office 2-3 years to prove itself. If we are evaluating this offseason in a vacuum in June, what are we really doing? Not a fan of that comment from Kraft today. Jump into a super chat here after the huddle. Looking forward to talking with you tomorrow. Can we also have a moment of silence for the mass casualty in Baltimore on the bridge? Brutal what happened in Baltimore. I don't know how many people saw this, but a cargo ship ran into a bridge overnight in Baltimore. Several people were on said bridge. Looks like it's a mass casualty event. It's absolutely awful. My thoughts are with people in Baltimore. I know a number of people from the Baltimore area. I lived in Virginia Beach for almost, actually, when I put it together, over a decade of my life, I believe, or close to a decade of my life. I lived in Virginia Beach, so I know a lot of people from Baltimore and that mid-Atlantic area. So, of course, my thoughts are with them. And hopefully there were a number of people saved as well. So just absolutely brutal event in Baltimore overnight. And I don't know how a cargo ship just runs into a bridge. Bridge has been there for a while. Negligence, I have no idea. I'm sure there will be an investigation, but just brutal stuff. Another super chat, thanks to After the Huddle. Let's say Washington drafts J.J. McCarthy. What would be our approach if that happens? Could we trade back at that point with teams wanting May and Daniels? Well, it all depends on if the Patriots want May or Daniels, right? I mean, if the Patriots love one of those two guys and both of those guys are sitting there for the Patriots to pick, then you pick that guy and you move on. I'm not a big believer in trading down because you have no control over what can happen after that moment. If you trade down beyond, 4 or 5, you have no control. Now, if you trade down to the Chargers spot at 5 and you say to yourself, well, we're guaranteed to get one of those two quarterbacks at 5 and we happen to love both of them, then it makes sense. But if you move to 7, if you move to 8, if you move to 9, if you move down to Minnesota to 11, you have no idea what's going to happen. Teams can leapfrog you in a second. So if you love the quarterback, don't play games. Take the quarterback. That's what I say. Thanks to After the Huddle for those 2 super chats. All right, back to Robert Kraft in his comments this morning. Kraft on free agency, specifically Calvin Ridley. Kraft shared that Ridley told the Patriots his girlfriend preferred to be in the South. He said the team had been willing to make up the difference in taxes between Massachusetts and Tennessee, while acknowledging that the quarterback situation could have been a factor as well. So a few things here. Similar to Mike Evans, we've talked about this. Mike Evans, his wife, I believe it was his wife, not his girlfriend. His wife told him, we're staying in Tampa. He wanted to go into free agency. His wife shut it down. He decided to stay in Tampa because the wife told him that's what they should do and have to do. Okay? By the way, DH says the Maryland governor confirmed that it lost power. So that's what happened. The ship lost power right before hitting. So there you have it. I appreciate those that mentioned that. I didn't see that this morning. Again, I got up and was pretty busy figuring out this Kraft stuff and saw a quick video from the fire department talking about the mass casualty event in Baltimore. So apparently the ship lost power. So just a freak awful accident and just truly, truly awful. But thanks for giving me that info on what happened down there in Baltimore. All right, so back to this idea of Calvin Ridley's girlfriend said, we're not going to the Northeast. Is this plausible? Absolutely. We talked about this as a possibility, if not probability. Ridley has grown up in the South. He played his high school football in Florida. He played his college football in Alabama. He obviously started his NFL career in Atlanta. He then went to Jacksonville, South, and more South. His girlfriend is from the South. So yes, this is entirely plausible that somebody who has lived their entire life in the South, is comfortable in the South, wants to remain, you guessed it, in the South. So I'm sure the girlfriend had a conversation with Ridley, and I'm sure that Ridley felt the pressure of staying where he's most comfortable and where his girlfriend is most comfortable. Makes sense. But there's other stuff that we can take from this Kraft quote. Kraft tells us that the Patriots were willing to pay more money. So according to Kraft, money was not the problem. Now, is he saying that to make it look better? I have no idea. But Kraft is telling us that they were willing to go to the level that Tennessee was at and above that level to acquire the player. Now, I think that would have been bananas. Paying Calvin Ridley $25 million, $26 million annually on the AAV and giving him $55 million guaranteed, I think would have been an outrageous contract to hand out. But according to Kraft, they were willing to do it. They were able to do it. They wanted to do it. But they did not think that Ridley wanted to be here. So they left the offer on the table as it was. You could question, why didn't you just up the offer anyway and see if Ridley was bluffing? I think that's a fair question to ask. If you were willing to go that high, then why not just go that high, put it on the table and say, okay, Calvin, now you tell us if you want it or not. So not in love with that answer from Kraft saying, we were willing to go that high. I would not have been willing to go that high, number one. And number two, then why just not go that high? Why not force the agent to make the decision at that point? And why not go that high earlier to force Tennessee's hand? You didn't want to juice the offer. And then when the offer had to be juiced, you didn't juice it, but you're telling us you would have. I don't know about that one. I just don't know about that one. Now, I also think that Jacoby Brissett caught some strays from the owner today. When Robert Kraft says that the quarterback situation could have been a factor for Calvin Ridley, I'm sorry, Jacoby, but you just got blasted. Oh, and by the way, quarterback situation isn't necessarily awesome, so could be some judgment there. Catching strays. More on the way coming up. Robert Kraft's thoughts, his comments. I want to quickly say this. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up while you're here. We have to continue to do this. I know I might sound like a broken record from time to time. Only try to say this a few times every podcast, but it is vital. It's the only way we continue to build traffic and expand the reach of this podcast. So if you like what we do, if you love what we do, give us that thumbs up, take a second of your time, and subscribe as we are trying to build up to 3,000 subscribers by April 8th. Spotify, Apple Pods, rate and review. King Cato 21 jumps in with a super chat. Kraft is doing what the Colts wouldn't in listening to Kuiper. Jonathan Kraft is running damage control on the Dynasty, claiming he was not happy with it. There's a lot here. Doing what the Colts wouldn't in listening to Kuiper. I don't think there's any evidence that Robert or Jonathan Kraft are listening to Mel Kiper Jr. I do not believe that Mel Kiper Jr. has that much power within the NFL. I don't. I appreciate Mel. I respect the work he does. I had the opportunity to host the show on ESPN Radio with Mel a week before the draft a few years ago. It is one of my personal career highlights, but I don't think any owner in the NFL is listening to Mel Kiper. I just don't. As far as running damage control on the Dynasty, we'll get to that a little bit later because Kraft did have comments on that as well. All right, let's talk about Kraft and what he had to say about the draft. He said the Patriots are open for business at number 3, but he added, quote, one way or another, I'd like to see us get a top-rate young quarterback. Look, one way or another, we know at some point we're going to get a young quarterback who will be gifted. Fortunately, there are a number of them in this draft, unquote. Again, Jacoby Brissett catching strays. You are not gifted enough, Jacoby. The Patriots are going to draft a quarterback. I think all of us are comfortable with that idea. A quarterback will be drafted in a month from now. The million-dollar question is, will that quarterback be drafted at 3? Will he be drafted at 34? Will he be drafted even later than that? Will we see the Patriots run a little bit of an okey doke and end up drafting their quarterback at, in the 3rd round, 4th round, and surprise everybody? But I am very confident that they will not walk into this season with Jacoby Brissett, Bailey Zappi, and Nathan Rourke as their 3 quarterbacks on the roster. They will add a quarterback. I don't think Robert Kraft is reaching here. But here's the comment that really jumped out at me. Kraft says, as a fan, he would like to see the Patriots take a quarterback at number 3 overall. I have a problem with this. This is passive-aggressive. This is passive-aggressive, putting pressure on Elliott Wolf. I'm not going to tell you what to do as the owner. I'm not going to make the football decisions, but I am going to tell you, and I am going to tell the world, as a fan, you know what I would love, Elliott? Wink, wink. I'd love that quarterback at number 3, baby. That is passive aggressiveness 101. Because now Wolf knows what the owner wants. The owner, as a fan, he wants a quarterback at number 3. And when you think about Kraft saying that, and you tie it into the idea that Wolf, as what's been reported, has not been guaranteed to keep his job. He doesn't know if he's going to have job security. I think he's going to stay, but he doesn't know that for a fact. So you have a de facto GM making these big decisions, not knowing his long-term security with the organization, and now the owner is saying, hey, at number 3, as a fan, I would love a quarterback to be taken. It puts a lot of pressure on Wolf to do something for the owner so he can keep his job. Because if the pick doesn't work out, or some people are criticizing the pick, Wolf can look at Robert and say, Robert, you wanted a quarterback at 3. A lot of people wanted a quarterback at 3. I picked the quarterback at 3. And this is very tough for Wolf, because if he does draft the quarterback at 3, what are people going to say now? Because of what Kraft said this morning, that as a fan, he would love a quarterback at number 3. If Wolf makes the selection at 3, and it's May, it's Daniels, it's McCarthy, whoever it is, if that person is a quarterback, you know it, I know it, the American people know it, there are going to be certain sections of the media that will say Wolf picked the quarterback only to make the owner happy. That's not Elliott Wolf's pick. That's the owner's pick. Kraft just put his de facto GM into a very, very, very difficult position. And it's unfair to Elliott Wolf, and it's unfair to this front office. What Kraft should have said is, I'm not making the football decisions. Whatever happens in the draft is the decision by Elliott Wolf and the rest of this front office. If it's a quarterback, great. If it's somebody else, great. They are going to do what's in the best interest of this football team, and I have no say in what happens on draft night. That's what should have been said. The only thing that should have been said. When you start dancing around what you would love as a fan, when you start talking about, yeah, we're going to have a young top-rate quarterback, you are implying, you are passive-aggressively, if not even directly, looking at your de facto GM and telling him what you want done. And that is unfair to the de facto GM. It's unfair. Because if he picks a guy at quarterback at number 3, that's going to be the narrative. That he was following orders from the owner. That he's not his own man, he's not his own GM, and he wasn't making the pick out of his own evaluation. Did not like that whatsoever. Didn't like it at all. King Cato, I was joking about the Kuiper comment. JK means joke. Ah, okay. So JK wasn't Jonathan Kraft. It was just joking. Or joke. Okay, got it. Well, I'm glad you don't think that Mel Kiper has the ear of Robert Kraft, because, as I said, I don't think that is the case. Don't forget to like and subscribe as you watch and listen. Kraft talked about expectations. Quote, I'd like to think there will be a big improvement next year. My hope and expectation is to make the playoffs. I feel like Jim Mora. Playoffs? Playoffs? Trying to win a game. Are we talking playoffs right now, Robert? Why would you ever, and I mean ever, utter playoffs when you're talking about this team right now? I don't care if you're talking about hopes, wishes, dreams, prayers. I don't care. You cannot fix your lips to mention playoffs in the same sentence when asked about expectations for this team. You are coming off of a 4-win season. What are we doing, Robert? Don't even bring it up. Playoffs should be out of your head. It should not exist within your vocabulary when talking about this offseason and this football team. Stop yourself. Somebody with the Patriots, can you stand by Robert and make sure he doesn't say the word playoffs? I mean, right now you don't know who's the starting left tackle. Jacoby Brissett is your starting quarterback. You don't have a wide receiver one. Can we stop mentioning playoffs? Again, I don't even care what the context was. I don't care if you're dreaming up this scenario. Don't even bring up the word. You're doing nothing to help yourself. You're doing nothing to help your football team. And this is just more of an indictment on Bill Belichick. Because if Kraft is sitting there thinking that this team has a chance at the playoffs right now, given the current roster, if he believes that, then he believes that slight upgrades. This team is better, I think, in a number of different categories, but slight upgrades is the difference between a 4-win season and a 10 or 11-win season in getting to the playoffs. And I don't agree. The playoffs are a lofty goal. I would tell the owner to stop using that word. On the NFLPA survey, Kraft said they're building a state-of-the-art workout facility that'll cost $50 million. Good. A $50 million workout facility is badly needed. I'm glad it's going to get addressed. He then said he did not realize there was an issue with the lack of daycare and thinks it's easy to fix. This is interesting because the daycare family room issue was in last year's survey. So did Robert not pay attention to last year's survey? Did people not tell Robert about last year's survey? Was there no communication about last year's survey? Or was it just blatantly ignored? Not great. Finally, before we get into some football stuff in the secondary, on the Dynasty, not the actual Dynasty, on the docuseries, Kraft said he was disappointed that it emphasized more of the Patriots' controversies and less of their on-field success. First question, who had the power of final edits? I would love to know that. Did the Krafts have final edit say? I know it was a Kraft production, and I know people will say that Kraft had the final, vote on what would make it and what would not make it because it was a Kraft production. However, there are documentaries that are made under umbrellas that have independence because the director, producer, and creative people ask for that before they decide to make said documentary. So, the Kraft production part can be just the fact the Krafts gave the filmmakers full access to what they had at their facility and access to personnel. It doesn't necessarily mean that Robert or Jonathan or somebody within the Kraft circle was sitting in the editing room making sure certain things made the cut and other things were cut. Of course, that is possible. And I'm not ruling that out. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that there are some filmmakers that will say, I know that we are using your footage, we're using your facility, we're speaking with your people. We understand that, and we will be as respectful as we can, but you have no say in what actually makes it into the documentary. We have final say on edits. We have final say on all of the cuts. We have final say on tone. And unless we know the contractual language between the filmmakers and Robert Kraft, then we don't know what we don't know. It is certainly possible that Kraft had his fingers all over this. I just want to make sure that people understand that there is another possibility here. It's not just one possibility of how this unfolded. There is another universe where the filmmaker gets the final say and says, I will not put this film together unless I get what I want. And that is full autonomy on this film. Was there a quid pro quo? We don't know. Again, certainly possible. It's not crazy to think that the Krafts would say, hey, look, we are going to give you this access, but make sure you make us look pretty good. And I would say that the evidence of the dynasty, the fact that Robert Kraft never really looks bad in this, or Jonathan, would lead you to believe that there was some kind of conversation or just pressure on the filmmaker to make sure the Krafts looked good. So if you watch the actual product, it would lead you to believe that there was some kind of agreement, whether it was said directly or not. I'm just pointing out that the director could have had the final say and decided unilaterally to make Kraft look good because Kraft gave him this footage and gave him the access. It also could have been just an outright inside job, quid pro quo. Kraft, you can get our facility, you can get the footage, but you best not say a crossword about us. And some of these things that you could address, wipe it off. Now, in Kraft's defense, you would also say, and could also say, that because so much focus was on the controversies, it would lead you to believe that Kraft did not have as heavy of a hand as some people would lead you to believe. Because why would Robert Kraft okay a documentary that paid so much attention on Spygate and Deflategate and not the 03-04 championships? You could say that Kraft didn't want Bill Belichick to get the credit, but Robert Kraft is the owner of the team. He also gets the credit for all the Super Bowls. I mean, if I were Kraft, I'd be perturbed if all of that success was shelved as much as it was. The perception that Belichick was unfairly maligned. This is from Andrew Callahan. I'm going to read it in full. I feel so privileged that we had Bill here. And, we hope when he's finished that we're going to have a chance to honor him the way we will do with Tom Brady this year. He goes on to say, the Eagles game, it was not adequate, 6, 12, 24 for Brady, etc. And, I look forward to the privilege of putting Bill into the Patriots Hall of Fame one day in the future. Robert completely dodged the question. I think it's safe to say that the relationship between Belichick and Kraft is icy. That's been reported for the last several years. Doesn't seem like they were BFFs. And I would also say that the biggest indication of this was when that 2003 Super Bowl video clip to the podcast that the team did not have a single shot of Bill Belichick. Now, I would say that was 100% done with purpose. You don't just mistakenly leave out the head coach of that Super Bowl winning team during that promotional video clip. No way, no how. And so that was a level of pettiness from the Krafts. And that's why people are certainly within bounds to say that the docuseries was fishy. And I do think there was a level of fishiness there because, again, Kraft was not criticized like any of the other people were criticized in that film. You add that up with the fact that Belichick was left off of that 2003 promotional video in the way that Kraft is dodging this question down in Orlando, it's not a great relationship right now. Of course, fences could be mended. These guys could get together down the road, but I don't think it's, surprising that Robert Kraft and Belichick aren't giving each other Christmas cards. Super chat. Kraft starting to tread into Jerry Jones territory. That's from Justin TF Patriot. Yeah, I didn't like some of the stuff that Kraft said. If you couldn't tell. I don't like this. Hey, the fan in me wants a quarterback at number 3 because I think that passive aggressively puts pressure on the front office to draft a quarterback at number 3, and it sets up the narrative that if the quarterback does go 3, Elliott Wolf was just listening to the owner. I don't like several of the things that he said. Mentioning the playoffs when asked about the expectations for this year, I think was not a good idea whatsoever. Saying that the NFLPA survey regarding the daycare and family situation was a surprise when it was on the survey last year doesn't make Kraft look like he's, well connected with what's going on. So there were several things. So those are my thoughts for now about Kraft. Let's get into some football. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every thumb means an awful lot. You're watching on YouTube right now. We're not streaming to Facebook. We're not streaming to Twitter. We are streaming exclusively to YouTube. So every single like that you give us on the YouTube channel means the absolute world to us. It is how we are going to build this audience. And I know I've talked about it before. I'm going to keep talking about it because that's why the numbers are growing. The only way that we can build and grow this podcast is by liking, commenting, subscribing, telling friends, telling family, telling coworkers on Spotify, Apple Pods, giving us a 5-star rating, giving us the reviews. That's how we continue to build this podcast, and it does continue to build, and I thank all of you for that. All right, beyond Kraft, Patriots news yesterday. Miles Bryant signs with Houston. Now, Bryant, as I know some people didn't like Miles Bryant, some people didn't think he was a good enough tackler, he's not big enough, et cetera, et cetera. The one thing that Bryant brought to this football team was versatility. He could play in the slot. He could play outside from time to time. He could play at free safety. He was all over the place for this secondary. And that versatility, when you get banged up, is critical to the operation. Miles Bryant played almost 75% of the snaps last year. 75% of the defensive snaps Miles Bryant was out there for. So you take him away, now you got to fill 75% of the snaps. Mike Reese over the weekend wrote about Bryant and mentioned that he lost a top advocate in Reese's mind in Bill Belichick. So it certainly seems like Bryant was 100% a Belichick guy. Belichick obviously gone. Therefore, Bryant is gone. Reese said that the Patriots were willing to work with Bryant on a deal that made sense for them, but he was not going to be a key cog within the system this year. So Bryant wants a bigger role. Patriots were not going to pay him the money to be a guy to get 75% of the snaps. So Bryant goes to Houston. Makes sense. Nick Caserio obviously was part of the front office when Bryant was in as an undrafted free agent. Words I would use with Bryant: steady, solid, again, versatile, not really with many high-end traits, smaller. But now you look at the secondary and how do things set up right now as they currently stand. Christian Gonzalez is obviously your CB1. Jonathan Jones, as of right now, is your CB2. Now, you also have two young guys who can make a difference. Let's not forget about Isaiah Bolden, who had a good preseason before the injury that took him out for the entire year. You've got Bolden, and you've got Alex Austin, who showed some flashes last year. So I think you go into camp, if this is how the roster is going to be, you go into camp, Gonzalez is your number one, no doubt, shut down corner. Then on the outside, you have a competition. Jonathan Jones, Isaiah Bolden, and Alex Austin. Maybe you draft somebody in the 6th or 7th round, or you find another undrafted free agent and you throw them into the competition. But that's the outside. And you wonder, can Isaiah Bolden or Alex Austin pop? If they pop during camp, if they pop during the preseason, that would be great news for the Patriots. If you could start one of Bolden or Austin on the outside, that allows you to move Jonathan Jones to the inside and play him in the slot. Or you can kick Jones to the back and play him at safety. So there's a number of different ways they can handle this. But right now, the leaders in the clubhouse, so to speak, Gonzalez and Jonathan Jones, your outside corners, Austin and Bolden, depth pieces on the outside. Your slot is going to be Marcus Jones versus Shaun Wade. Shaun Wade, don't forget, was mostly a slot guy before he came here to New England. Doesn't really have the speed to be the outside guy consistently. So I think in the slot, you could have a competition between Marcus Jones and Shaun Wade. This is a gigantic preseason for Marcus Jones. This is a make or break scenario for him. He got to show up and ball out. As far as what you have with the possibility of signing a veteran, I still say you could bring in somebody like Stephon Gilmore. You sign him to a 1-year deal, and you could have Gonzalez and Gilmore on the outside. And then you can also utilize Jonathan Jones on the outside given certain matchups. Or, as I said, you can slide Jonathan Jones to the slot or to free safety. And then you have Gilmore, Gonzalez starting on the outside with Bolden and Alex Austin continuing to develop underneath them. The one thing, though, and I think this stands for the L'Jarius Sneed conversation that we have yet to have because of Mayo and Kraft meeting with the media, but we should also bring up, if you bring in a L'Jarius Sneed or you sign a Stephon Gilmore, you are putting them in front of Bolden and Alex Austin. And if you're trying to build this young nucleus and you think that Bolden and or Austin have potential to be an outside guy, then you might not want to take reps away from them during minicamp, during camp, and during the preseason. Because if you could hit on one of Bolden or Austin, that is great news. So that's a part of this entire story from 30,000 feet that Wolf and Mayo are looking at. Do we want to bring in somebody who is a veteran, who right now is very likely better than those two guys, especially Sneed? Are we going to bring in somebody like that? Are we going to pay them the money? Are we going to give up the pick compensation for somebody like that when we believe one of Bolden or Austin could pop? Because now we're just spending assets to spend assets. That's a part of the conversation. They could also sign a free safety. Justin Simmons is still out there. But we know that Marte Mapu is now going to work as a safety. That's part of this conversation. Can you put Mapu as part of the safety rotation? Can he be your free safety? What's his weight? How's he look in the preseason? They signed Jalen Hawkins a week ago. He has started at safety in the NFL before. He started a bunch of games for Atlanta a couple of years ago. He's more of a downhill safety guy, not a free-range free safety, but he is also part of the mix. Inevitably, they got to stay healthy. DJ, 41, jumps in with a super chat. Thank you, DJ. Do you think the Patriots wait until after the draft to offer a trade for Higgins Ayuk, with next year first being the offer? I think that is more likely than not, DJ. If they are going to trade for a wide receiver one, and a lot of people are starting to hint at that, even Mayo yesterday, it makes sense to wait until after the draft. If you don't think another team is going to jump in and trade for T. Higgins, then why are you going to give up a draft pick in this year's draft just to give it up? If you think you have some leverage, then you could wait. And if you wait, now you bring in the top tier wide receiver, you improve your team, which arguably would improve your pick situation next year, and your team will be better this year. So you could deal that future pick to Cincinnati but get a full draft out of this season's draft, right? I'll give you the hypothetical. If you can draft a tackle at 34, or you move up late into the first round to draft that tackle, now you've got your quarterback at 3, you've got your tackle, and now you can draft a receiver in the 3rd round. And if you have the idea that you're going to go out and acquire a veteran guy like an Amari Cooper or a T. Higgins, I don't think Ayuk's getting dealt. If you make that trade after the draft, well, now it makes all the sense in the world, doesn't it? Because now in the big picture, here's just strictly a hypothetical going off of DJ's scenario. You could walk out of the draft and you could walk into mandatory minicamp with young quarterback Drake May, Daniels McCarthy, young left tackle by moving late into the first round or sticking and picking at 34, young wide receiver with your 3rd round pick, let's say Jalen McMillan, just to throw a name out there. And then in free agency, not in free agency, then via a trade after the draft, you trade for a T. Higgins or an Amari Cooper. So now you have Jaden Daniels, Amarius Mims, and your wide receiver core is T. Higgins, Jalen McMillan, Kendrick Bourne, KJ Osborne, Pop Douglas. How much better do you feel about that team than you feel about the team right now as it currently sits? So I do think it makes some sense to wait. If you don't think by waiting you're going to hurt your leverage, if you think if you wait you might miss out on the guy, that's no bueno. But if you have options and you can wait, it makes a ton of sense, DJ, because what I just laid out. You don't impact this year's draft. You get the talent out of the deep wide receiver and tackle classes that you have. You then acquire the veteran receiver who you can put in as wide receiver 1. And now you're kind of moving along. Now you have answers at quarterback. You have answers at tackle. You have answers at wide receiver. If you trade for somebody like T. Higgins, you have answers at wide receiver for the next 4 or 5 years, frankly. So now you're kind of cooking. All right, I appreciate all the super chats. Don't forget to give us that thumbs up. Give us that like. It is very much appreciated by every single one of you that give us those thumbs up. More thumbs means more eyeballs as we build this brand. We're just now streaming exclusively to YouTube, so they mean even more now than they did just last week. So give us that like and subscribe. 3,000 subscriptions by April 8th is the goal. We're less than 300 away from that, close to 250. So let's keep pushing with those subscriptions, especially if you listen on Spotify or Apple Pods. If you want this podcast to continue to exist, just head over to the YouTube channel, like today's video, and subscribe to the channel. Even if you listen every day to Spotify and Apple Pods, it will still help us build this community. Something big breaks. We'll be all over it. If not, we'll talk to you tomorrow at 11 a.m. sharp. It is the Nick Cattle Show. Thank you to every single one of you that invest your time into this program.